Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Exploring the Utiliverse. Well, in today's episode, we are continuing our deep dive into how new energy resources like grid-scale solar and home storage are shaking up the grid. We've got Dr. Manny Vadari with us again to help us unpack the integration challenges and explore what utilities can do to keep up. He's here to break down these concepts and show us how utilities can better manage and make the most of these resources to keep the grid stable and resilient. Those are important aspects of the grid operation. Whether you're in the energy sector or just curious about where the future of energy is headed, you're in for some great insights. Let's get started. So Manny, we touch on the DERMS or DRS asset. We talk about solar. We talk about battery energy system. We talk about inverter-based resources, how they are dispatchable. We touch on some of the business cases, and then some of the standards. So it looks like the pieces are there, enabling and projects, proof of concept, right? The DOE funding program. That's across the U.S. and constant announcement, actually, right? The GRIP funding and all of this are coming out. I think it's very encouraging to allow the industry, right, and the participant to take on some of these projects, demonstrate it, see the result, write reports, and share that with the industry. So I think all of that pacing is very good from that perspective. And I think there's greater confidence around implementing these things, right? Seeing the outcome, and maybe some of them actually indicate what not to do. So now, as we left, or at least I parked the point or the thread around, okay, now the how of the distributed utility, kind of the one in between generation, transmission, and the end customer, whether it is a commercial, industrial, or residential. And there are IT system out there, their cloud system, right? So the conventional SCADA, outage management system, distribution management system, which kind of lump into the ADMS perspective, have been well established. We have a solid group of vendors that operate in that space. Then we recently hear about the DERMS, Distributed Energy Resource Management System, that is expected to manage these assets and how they operate. And now we have two systems. And then we have grid edge system, front of the meter, behind the meter, and we have aggregator and all of these things, right? So I think it would be good for you to understand, when people talk about a DERM system, and I think that definition is constantly evolving in some way. Depends on who you talk to. That from your perspective, what are some of the challenges or the issues, how mature they are? Please let us know.
Yes, this is a topic very close to my heart because when I wrote my first edition of the book on electric system operations in 2012, I called it a Distributed Energy Management System, or DEMS. And I gave it a kind of a functional, conceptual view of what it should do. When I did the second edition in 2018, my summarization was that we actually have not progressed that far. And I'll tell you why. Because I think our customers, the utilities themselves, haven't quite centered around what problem they're trying to solve. And the reason for that is, depending on the location of the utility, depending on the scale of the utility, depending on the type of the utility, investor-owned utility or a municipal utility or a co-op or something like that, the problem that they're solving is different. What DERs did, what IBRs did, what renewables did was that it made the problem locational. It made the problem local. The problem faced by a utility in Arizona, lots of solar, behind the meter, front of the meter, grid scale, very different from a problem faced by a utility in the Pacific Northwest. Gray skies, even today, gray skies, raining all morning, lots of wind, but wind on the other side of the mountains and so on. Very different from, say, a Duke, which has got a significant amount of transmission-based solar. So what a utility like a Duke would ask would be very different from what a utility, say, a Tacoma Power, a small municipal utility in Tacoma, Washington would ask, or a Grant County PUD would ask, are all very different. And I think what utilities are trying to do is that they're trying, each of them believe that their ask is the right ask. Go ahead.
Do you see the tendency, let's focus on at that point about the ask. The industry distribute electrons, right? Electricity. So there's some common thread about the end commodity that's being delivered. But how they operate and the regulatory regime and their return on investment, whether it is performance-based, very few actually, but everything is a rate-based, is there a tendency to call future-proof? So I ask for everything today, right? Whether the business case is there and ensuring that the industry or the vendors to move there, and to your point, maturity. And I think thank you for emphasizing the point about locational. So locational is the asset, but also the need. So the conversation for utilities that what they are looking to solve, to your point, is it peak response, right? Peak demand, or ancillary services, or basically electrical objectives like voltage regulation, frequency regulation, and what investment needs to be put in place. I think that's so important, at least from a vendor perspective, as we see this out there. And maybe from a consultancy perspective, you see from that perspective, when somebody asks for a system that can do end-to-end, and does it exist, and is it the right investment?
And that you hit the nail on the head, Young, because I think utilities believe they want a tool. They want a DERMS tool. Let's go get a DERMS tool. Of course, it'll solve all my problems right away. And the future-proofing concept is a fleeting concept at best right now, because we don't even know what we don't know. This is like trying to predict the future in a rapidly changing environment. We just talked about storage, right? Storage devices, where I said that the storage device of the future has not even been invented yet. Similarly, the ability to expect that we're going to still put solar panels made of glass on our rooftops or everywhere else, we don't know if that's the right answer. We don't know what part hydrogen will play in all of these. We don't know a lot of these kinds of questions. So expecting a system to be built by a vendor that delivers to all of these things is complex and probably not easily achievable at best. The reason I say that is because if you get the tool, then decide how you're going to use it, versus decide the problem you're trying to solve first. Put together some kind of an operating model and create some kind of a futuristic view of that. I expect these signposts. If I'm watching for these signposts, and if they happen, I may need to pivot into something. I'll give you a great example. We talked about EVs a little while ago, and we have seen that the influx of EVs is still slow. Why? Because things like range anxiety, charging time, all of these things are becoming important. But we believe that in the next 3 to 5 years, charging will come down to somewhere between 9 to 12 minutes. Just keep that in mind. If that happens, and we firmly believe that will happen because everybody is moving in that direction. We're already seeing news coming from China and Japan and everything, where they're talking about 1,000 miles of range and the ability to charge up to 80% in under 10 minutes. So we know it's coming, and we know it's not too far away. The point is that EV curve, that hockey stick of EV influx will suddenly take off. When that happens, we need to be ready for it. Not just from individual EVs, but also fleet EVs.
Well, you mentioned about charging in 9 to 10 minutes there. Just scared the hell out of me for utility. What kind of software, what kind of asset, how about the distribution transformer to be able to allow that much current to come down the pipe to get there? But you're right, the technology will make those kind of progress because mass adoption requires those kind of timing, whether utility is ready or not, and how the technology would deliver that. That is certainly quite interesting.
Absolutely. So what we try to advise utilities at all sizes, small, medium, large, doesn't matter, put together a kind of a roadmap or a journey map to say that this is what we need now, and based on these signposts, our needs may change dramatically to other requirements, so that when I'm selecting a vendor, this is another of those areas like the ADMS selection, and you've seen this, you are a vendor, so you understand this better than me, the need to create that partnership. So when you are getting a vendor, you are getting a partnership, somebody who is going to stay with you and who understands those same, my signposts, who understands those same requirements, and who may not have all the requirements now, but you believe if they have the same vision as you do, who have the same understanding of what the future brings as you do, and who is able to pivot at the same speed as your needs are, then you can get there on an evolutionary cycle, not necessarily trying to future-proof everything right in the beginning.
Yep. So you comment around, I think, the future-proof, all of the application, very simple to very advanced, just like reliability, resiliency, and market participation. What we observe in conversation with our utility customers, the demand response, like managing peak, the basic blocking, tackling today that a lot of utilities have peak charges and all those things, whether it's in TVA or certain regulatory jurisdiction, by the way. So simple things like conservation, voltage reduction, dynamic voltage reduction, those are conventional centralized control that are well known. And then you have your low curtailment that the grid adds and the thermostat program and the water heater, right? So those programs have been around for some time, right, and well established. And now these newer assets that we're talking about, right now they are of enough size, critical mass, and availability and flexibility, and even maybe some market signal, right, to allow them to participate. So I think that's what's making it very interesting from a use case standpoint, strictly allowed to help manage peak reduction. If you ask me, that's what we see when we hear ERCOT or Texas talking about this. That's basically it in the beginning. And I think that's getting a lot of attention. So DR, or demand response, from a surveillance perspective, that is one of the pillars of DERs, and that is the low-hanging fruit, right?
Exactly.
Give you more flexibility. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So, in fact, one of the things that I have done in the more recent past, about a couple of years ago, and I'm continuing to build on that, is the concept of renewable-aware distribution operations. This has multiple facets to it. One is you take your ADMS that you think you were done with, you're not, because it now needs to become renewable aware. And renewable aware means that it forces you to think of renewables in every aspect of distribution operations. Switching, field support, asset management. We talked about EVs. If they come in en masse, how I do my asset management and system planning is going to change. All of that is going to change, and the DERMS then becomes a key cog, key plug in that ecosystem that is looking at things like demand response, solar, wind, storage, microgrids, VPPs, all of these things that then plug into the ADMS, because the end point of that interaction with the grid or the edge will all need to happen in such a way that the distribution grid as a whole stays stable, reliable, resilient under both blue sky, gray sky, and storm conditions.
Great point. Interesting. From a renewable terms perspective, the terms that would be used is that then the conventional grid management system, maybe EMS, ADMS, needs to become renewable aware or DERs aware.
Absolutely.
And for those who may be in the current ADMS realm, we would tell those vendors to be physics aware or physics informed.
You got it.
Right. And got the opposite side, right? Because we say that ADMS help maintain. Ultimately, for when you look down at just the commodity electron level, is the laws of physics will not be broken, regardless what market say. And I think that's where we believe that the combination to the system working, sharing, exchanging information, defining what is the use case so that allows both to grow properly.
Absolutely.
Because managing the asset, we believe, like the terms in the space, right? You manage those assets, you can coordinate all that, but then protection, coordination and control, existing with distribution automation today, which is already well aware of that. But now these assets, to your point, now the software need to be DERs enabled. That's the term we use internally when we talk about these assets, that power flow, distribution state estimation, contingent analysis, all of those things now have to be sensitive to that. And I think that's an important point then. That brings us to the conversation around data sharing. I don't know, Manny, how do you see that out there? Because, vendors sometimes lock things down by design, right? Proprietary, competition, cybersecurity, and all those things. I mean, we can talk about standards and everything else, but it's not easy. And even when I talk to utilities, right, some utilities don't even have access to their meter data, right? Yep. Now, never mind about the EVs or how they run and where they are and the time scale that comes in. I think solving the battery charging problem may be easier than trying to get all the data to flow properly in the time domain so that this future of bidirectional power flow, resiliency, and all that, that to me is something that is on top of our concerns or awareness, whether it's standards, but just the coalition of the willing. Let's put it that way. I'll use that term, right, early. Welcome the observation aside. So now we move from electrons to zeros and ones.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, just if you permit me, I'll expand your question a little bit to have data and models. And I separate them because one talks about the physical connectivity, locational connectivity of devices in the field, and the other one talks about their behavior in real time, right? And I think both of these are kind of a mirage almost, because we've been chasing after it for a fairly long time. And extremely critical because the models, unless every system, unless to your point on AMI data, meter data, unless the same house that I talk about, the premise, the residence or the CNI or whatever it is the same in the AMI model versus the ADMS model versus the DERMS model, unless they are the same, I'm essentially trying to chase my own tail. Keeping those things in mind, whether it is a centralized system like a DERMS or an ADMS, or a decentralized system that we may have at the edge, keeping that model common, understanding it at a real-time level, saying, okay, this circuit breaker or switch has opened, you're no longer connected to the network, you're now a microgrid or an independently operating grid edge system, is critical, because then you need to know when you do come back into the centralized system, what the impact is. The next layer above that is the data issue. We are now getting data from thousands or hundreds of thousands to millions of devices out in the field, whether they are automation devices, home automation, AMI, and so on and so forth, and even synchrophasers. You're starting to see distribution level synchrophasers coming in. If we don't get that act together and saying, okay, you know what, let's get some kind of a global ID for each asset so that data, wherever the data is coming from, is talking about the same asset. So that depending on who needs it to perform whatever function they're doing, whether it is voltage control, CVR, or outage management, and all of those kinds of things, understanding the impact of one on the other becomes very important. So yes, model and data, and having standards. Hopefully the SIM interface, the SIM standard continues. I believe that there is a lot of activity that needs to be done on SIM as well, because while the model is good, it does not have any kind of a good visualization mechanism, because I would like to get the models cleaned up before they show up inside an ADMS. I would like the same model to be shared with the DERMS and or the grid edge system so that everybody is working off of the same version of the truth.
Yeah, I believe you highlighted, this is where we see very common, right? The quality of the topology to start with, then the quality of the network model understanding so that we can run the basic power flow, VVO or OFR based on it, right? Then now the complexity of the grid edge, which will then introduce different power conditions within the network, and that's where data sharing, where is the source of truth? So back to your point, I think what we maybe definitely agreed on here is that one is the topology, the network model, and the data layer. So you can have a lot of data, but then you can't act on it reasonably without understanding the laws of physics.
Exactly.
And laws of physics, if you cannot overlay the data in the right places to understand how they influence the basic laws of physics, whether it's Ohm's law, Kirchhoff's law, like balance of voltage and current, and Joule's law. To me, those are the only three as an electrical engineer, right? That you have to obey. Those are absolute like gravity, all right? Unless you get out of this atmosphere. So I think those are the challenges, and continually, I think this is where understanding data, how it's going to be improved, the quality of data, and sometimes you can reset. You can get your data to be clean, and as soon as it's clean, maintaining it, sustaining it, growing with that data is challenging. And perhaps maybe this leading right on to very topical conversation today everywhere you go, right? AI, ChatGPT, NVIDIA at the grid edge, and all of this stuff. Perhaps that is the miracle here or tool that's going to come and help basically. Maybe manage is too strong, but understanding the data to start with, and then apply the data in some way to help the process. Because in some ways, it's very challenging for utility based on the size of the utility, the skill that they have. And I think you made some comment around that. Who has the skill to run this system? How will they be trained? So to us, I think, it now get to the point of data and some of the new technology. What are you seeing, at least in your work with some of the larger utility who has the wherewithal, and they've probably done some homework and research? It'll be interesting to see directionally where things are starting and may have an impact on the industry.
So I believe there are two pieces to this. One of them is, we talked about cloud earlier. Let's get to that separately. But I think when it comes to AI and ML, it's one of those things where a lot of utilities are, I would say, dabbling in it at this point in time, trying to understand where it may actually have the biggest help. Outage management is one where we are seeing a lot of utilities trying to understand, essentially getting around the bad modeling information they have, because every time I have this breaker open, if that house is losing power every time, and my model doesn't seem to show them connected, I now know that my model has an error in it. So things like that. So where AI comes in a very, very helpful is in places like pattern matching that allows a software system to identify patterns that a human probably could, but would need a lot more data and a lot more time and a lot more effort to do it. Whereas now you can have a computer system do the same thing.
Would you not say that a utility operation is a lot of patterns in some way, right? Sunrise,
Absolutely.
sunset,
Yes.
and all that. Yes. I think the only thing that may change is when you have the grid edge and then you have the weather that has an impact on the power flow. Let's put it that way. And perhaps this is where the near future. And I think, whatever we say about AI, generally ML today, maybe in 3 months it's going to be old. That's going to turn all of our assumption on our head, given the pace of innovation.
Absolutely, and possibly some biases as well, right? We are all hardcore engineers. It's like, well, there's no way an AI system is going to be able to do what I can do, right? False. That is just completely false. And you're right. At the pace at which AI is moving, I think the reason why AI has not yet, and I use it very, very carefully, come into the control center, is primarily because there is still an incredible amount of concern on the dependability of these things. You still want a human being there. You're still not quite there in the whole, the Tom Cruise's movie of everything being automated and so on and so forth, right? You're not quite there yet because you're afraid that if you have a computer making decisions, then you're heading towards the Terminator sequence where the computer takes over the world. However, there are several places where there is a role to be played. Model cleanup, data cleanup. You're seeing a lot of that showing up in the next generation of AMI meters that are looking at things like face understanding, model cleaning up, and things like that. You're going to start there first before you bring them into the real-time control centers, only because of the greater risk involved of allowing a computer system to make decisions. Right now, we allow the computer systems to perform the analysis and give the operator the information so that the operator makes the decisions. Some things, of course, run in closed loop that you know very well, volt-var optimization and so on, but none of them are directly opening and closing breakers that force customers to lose power. So there is a little bit more of a concern there right now. I think it's more cultural than real.
In terms of that comment, I would highlight maybe perhaps something that has been going on very well relative to real-time automation and automatic operation is Flisser.
Of course.
We have experience with customers, very large system that will restore based on an algorithm. So we can, it's an algorithm ultimately, and it only take maybe a few points of input to understand the physics, right? And then it just make that. So to me, right there, really even a human may not be able to make decision fast enough, right? But now there. So I think to the point that you're saying, I think part of what we see is just trust, because in the future, all the data, just kind of get back to the point about data correlation, the algorithm will need to be trained on a set of data that is comprehensive. And not everything is match up, time skew, time scan. Right? That to me, I think is going to be the bigger challenge. The algorithm will be okay, but to be able to train, right? Just like the way ChatGPT is talking about how many billions of tokens and all that model that they are training. Utility may be much smaller, but all the data be in the right place, you trust in the right training are there. Maybe it should train on everything, and then it will learn what is the right pattern. So I think it's very interesting time how we see this tangential technology and possibly the talent that may come into the space to help move some of the needles. But I think it's going to help with people and skill. And I think you are doing some emphasis on training also, right? I mean, helping utility and personnel, because like who knows how to run an IBR? Like who knows how to run the DERM system? even how will an ADMS that is DRs and aware will be operating in the future. So I think there's not just technology, but people to be able to just understand the concept and operate that. And I think the industry does need a lot of help. I think if operators cannot, raise the capacity level, then the machine will have to do it, in my opinion, right?
Okay. Absolutely. So I think you made a great point, Young, in talking about systems like Flizzr, right? Systems like Flizzr are still built on the physics of how the system works. It's actual calculations. Making the leap from a physics-based calculations to an AI requires, like what we talked about, good models and good data. The second thing we have found, at least as a part of the training stuff that I've been doing for a very long time, is that utilities, there is a reason why some of the operators have been in the job for 30, 40 years, right? Because there are situations or events that happen once every 15, 20, 30 years. That's it. So you use that particular lesson learned into a training sequence so that now you can train every operator coming in. And you need to feed those kinds of things back into your pattern matching algorithms as well, so that they continue to learn not just from that pattern, but other potentially similar patterns. So we always use the word, vendors very often think of it as technology. I use the word people, process, and technology. And I put technology the third because I think people and processes, we talked about processes and protocols and everything earlier, are very, very important, because one of the things that utilities will need to learn and move quickly is, as we talked about with smaller utilities especially, the need to get the right skill sets that is able to operate the right equipment, that is able to manage the right systems to deliver the best results at the cheapest price.
Well, we've touched on new assets, technology, standards, the maturity on some of these things. So perhaps the utility listener in the audience here, we kind of say, okay, what are some of the thoughts or closing thoughts that you would have to bring some of these narratives together, so that as they think about when they work on their operating or strategic plan in the next number of years, right? Not both just with capital investment, but with investment in their human capital, the training that they need to do, and how do they work with the vendor ecosystem to one of moving in a similar direction, with what I would say expectation of each other's, but not in a stage where it stress out the ecosystem, right? Well, by talking about future-proof, obsolescence-proof, but learning and growing together. I think that's what, the primary thread is, that we're still very early in the cycle, and the opportunity is immense. Once these assets are on the ground, we learn how to harness it, like tame it, right? And harness it, right? And train it and operate. Welcome some of your closing thoughts on this and advice for the industry, because ultimately you are from the consultancy side, and maybe some relevant advice along those dimensions.
Absolutely. Something that we have done very consistently with many utilities, big and small, is that, and it's more the scale that changes from a very large utility to a very, very small utility. But I think the key steps do not change. Step number one is to kind of define what that vision looks like, meaning that we will support renewable resources. A utility could say, we don't want it. We're already 100% hydro. Who cares, right? We're done. But understanding that vision, and we talk about an operating model, the reason is that before you buy a system, you need to understand how are you going to operate this bigger piece. We just talked about renewable aware operations, transmission, distribution, renewables, edge. how are they all going to come together so that then you understand, okay, this piece is by the EMS, this piece is through the ADMS, this piece is through the DERMS, DRMS, and so on, so that then you can come back and talk about understanding what each system is expecting to do. Along this path, we talk about what are the potential future scenarios that will force you to change directions. An example, as I just said, if this scenario of charging an electric vehicle in 9 to 12 minutes happens, what is that going to do to my load? Another future scenario, many states are looking to cancel out natural gas. That is going to, think of the bump in electrification that is going to give you to your load. So if those happen, or when those happen, how do I react to it? So we talk about this, we call it a journey map that says, if these signposts, I'm watching these signposts, I don't have to do anything right now, but if they happen, what do I need to do about it? The second piece of that is a typical utility cycle is 2.5 to 4 years. Meaning that we're right now in 24, if something is going to happen between 27 and 28, I better start working on it now. The reason for that is between recognizing the need to getting approvals, to getting budgets, to getting your vendor to develop those things, to implementing them, to testing them, to bringing them into production, we believe is an approximately 2.5 to 4 years. So that's why this journey map, we've got a set of waves that we talk about every 2.5 to 4 years to say, I'm watching for the next 4 years so that if something is coming up, I need to start getting ready for it now. I can go through my approvals and all of that stuff. City councils and regulators and all of those, the mayor and so on and so forth. So that becomes important because then you come back into saying, here are the requirements that I need in this block of time. But keeping my journey map, I'm saying, watch out for these requirements that are coming in the future so that we are not completely flying blind on what comes next. For example, if I'm building a relationship, say, with Survalent, I should not be looking to buy a system just for what I need now. I need to have a system that is going to grow with me so that we can then say, let's design this journey map. And if Survalent has bought into that journey map, then we know that we are both looking at the same journey as we go from 4 years to 4 years to 4 years to 4 years.
Well, great for your closing thoughts. And as I listen to your closing thoughts, I kind of say, oh, man, I could use another 30 minutes to expand on the closing thoughts on some of these ideas. And we must have you back to explore some of this because I think that space is moving so rapidly, in my opinion, that what we say today, we may have to make an addendum, let's say in 6 months from now. But as for the audience, as we wrap up, what I would say, a very insightful conversation with a number of threads on the topic around utilities, the future of the grid, and distributed energy resources and IBRs. I would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to you, Manny, for your time, sharing your expertise and your vision with our listeners. Well, I believe that we have covered significant ground, by the way, talking about the transformation of utility operation. We touch on utility operation, customer network model, and how some of these advanced technology and the planning that's going to be required for them to be ready. And your perspective on how to possibly integrating a renewable energy solution and modernize the grid has opened some new thinking as we talk about applying AI and machine learning and some of that. And basically, I thought, on some of these topics, I couldn't learn anything new, having been in the industry so long, right? So it looks like I'm going to need to hit your books again and get some tutoring from you, Dr. Vadari, on some of these new concepts. And it's exciting, though.
Absolutely.
And I think the comment I would make for our listeners is that this discussion today should help, I believe, to provide some strategic framework and frankly, some reflection, based on where you are, your jurisdiction, your business model, to understand the evolving landscape. Because in some places, it's moving fast. In some places, like standards and guidelines may move a little slower. Whether you're a professional in the utility sector or even enthusiasts, right? Like some of us, I think this is very much that many things to consider, reflect, and prioritize for possible action at your utility or at your company as we all look to move along with this future. Well, thank you again, Dr. Vadari, for your participation in the Survalent podcast. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in. The journey through the Utiliverse is only accelerating.
Absolutely.
And there always will be more to explore. And until next time, keep innovating and pushing the boundaries of what's possible in our electrification future. Thank you and take care. We value your thoughts and questions, so feel free to connect with us by email to utiliverse@survalent.com, follow @Utiliverse on X, and post on X using the hashtag Utiliverse.